without further ado, I want to introduce our fantastic speaker today and talk about our topic. So Julie, if you could come off mute and join us.
Hi, Kristi.
Hi, Julie. We're so thrilled to have you today.
I'm really excited to be here.
This is a fantastic topic. And I will tell you, when it came to registration, this became like one of our highest registered for webinars. And I will say, I think people are just generally curious how you do this and how you do it well. And I know it's something that you and I have talked about a lot over the past couple of years. And I know it's something you've pretty much nailed. So I'm thrilled to hear you share your expertise with the community.
Well, like I said, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And I think that with, it's an important topic, really figuring out how to handle proof of concept or pilot projects and make them convert. We all get that question a lot. So it's an exciting place to be.
Wonderful. Well, Julie, I'm going to pass it over to you. Feel free to take it away. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, allow you to pull up your presentation there. And then just for folks, I'm going to go off of Zoom. I will be in the chat. So if you've got questions I can answer, happy to do that. Otherwise, I will be back on when Julie's finished and we'll get through some Q&A later. So Julie, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Kristi. And again, thank you everyone for taking time. I know how busy everyone is. I also have to say that I'm equally a speed talker like Kristi, so I will try and keep things slowed down a little bit. And I think the presentation will probably be about 20-25 minutes today. So we'll spend plenty of time with Q&A as well. So just a really quick introduction. Again, my name is Julie Oddo. I'm the VP of Customer Success with Learn to Win. My background is in cloud HR tech for probably over 15 years now, always with an eye on the customer. That was through a journey in professional services, a little bit in product management, and then really into the customer success world. Learn to Win, just a quick background there, is a micro learning platform that has basically three main components: really easy authoring, mobile first for the learners themselves, and really great insights that our clients can get on the learning that their employees take. So being in an early startup, I think it's really important to think about what this proof of concept or pilot process looks like and be able to nail it really early. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk, this is really our agenda or our roadmap for today. Why do we do proof of concepts? In a little bit in that space, primarily our time will be spent on the foundation of a successful proof of concept and then the components of what that really looks like. And that's really the key aspect, is our number 3. So first of all, I'll get asked the question, should all deals start with a pilot or proof of concept? And the answer is absolutely not. Of course, if you can sign a deal that is 1 year, 2 years, whatever it might be, go for it, right? But with early startups, a lot of customers, whether they're large or small, want to see, is this really going to bring us the value? Is this really going to work for us across the board? So that's when we offer that in, much like any other, service levels or packaging that your product or service offers. It should be there, not the first thing that people offer up, but if, a customer or a prospect is in a space that they're thinking about it, it's absolutely something that you can put on the table and most often end up, winning that larger deal. I'll often get asked the question too, do they end with a yes or a no? And the answer is no. First of all, we don't position pilots or proof of concepts as at the end of this, you're either going to go with us or you're not. We try and position them as, this is our starting point and we'll figure out where we want to go from here. And again, hopefully it's not a no, it's how do we want to pivot to make this more successful if the pilot maybe wasn't the raging success that you initially think it may be. So overall, we want to make sure that the proof of concepts are demonstrating that value, they're fulfilling the customer requirements, and ultimately that use case, right, for a full rollout. So in a lot of ways, we're going to look at this today as a very, very minimal customer journey. You're basically going to be taking your customers through a modified piece of that customer journey. So to me, the one foundation to a successful proof of concept is structure. This concept should be done for any customer, any size, any vertical, any industry, anything. Everyone runs through the same pilot program. So that way you have your, as the provider, you have your process that you're taking them through. You know what to expect. You know how to drive them through it regardless. I'm going to use a story I was thinking about this morning. And if you know Kristi, you know she's a big runner. And if you were to say to Kristi, hey, Kristi, I want to help you improve your running. Kristi might be like, that's amazing. But if you don't know if Kristi's goal is to increase her distance, which quite frankly, I'm not sure how it could be since she already runs marathons, or it's to increase her speed, and you don't know for how long she wants this improvement to take, then your expectations are going to be in very different places. I might be thinking, I'm going to give her a quick and dirty course on how to make her running faster. And I might think that that's going to take 3 weeks. In her mind, she might be thinking, hey, I've always wanted to be able to run an Ironman. So she might be thinking more about the distance, and she might be thinking that this journey is going to go on for 6 months. So having structure and making sure that that structure is very formed at the very beginning of this pilot journey is, to me, the most important piece to start with, and really throughout the entire journey. So when we think about what that structure looks like, I designed basically 5 components to what I would consider a successful proof of concept. And we're going to talk about each one of these. But at a high level, we're going to talk about scoping and pricing, what those goals and success criteria are, a clear timeline and the milestones associated. What is that experience going to look like for your customer? And I'm going to use the word customer here because we really want to make sure that even though they're in theory still a prospect, we want to treat them like that customer partner at this point. And then finally, that insights review and expansion planning, which really allows you to tie everything together, present it back to that customer, and talk about how you're going to move that relationship forward. So I decided to do some scoping and pricing do's and don'ts. So first and most important, keep the scope small and very well defined. If the customer starts to talk about making things bigger, you may be anxious to think that this is actually a good thing because they want to expand that relationship already. But what you can do here is actually talk about how that will be in the next phase. And that allows for them already to keep thinking that this isn't over at the end of the pilot or the proof of concept. It's much more of just a roadmap to where the relationship is going to go through the whole process. You don't want to promise anything too big or too complex. You know that for pilots, and we're going to talk about pricing in a minute, they are paying. You're not necessarily looking to make money in the pilot. So you certainly don't want to make anything that's too big or too complex. You want to be really involved in the entire process. You don't want to run this as a self-serve proof of concept. You want to make sure you have your hands in there. The more that you can do to ensure the success of the proof of concept, the better. We want to make sure we're identifying stakeholders with very clear roles and responsibilities. Again, very similar to an implementation. We want to make sure that we're thinking, who are the people that are going to be driving this? Who is that executive sponsor? Who's the person that's going to be able to sign the check at the end? We don't want to include too many stakeholders. Some people might have heard the 2 pizza rule, which is never have a meeting. If you have too many people in a meeting, people in a meeting should never exceed how many you could feed 2 pizzas to. I want to use the 1 pizza rule here. The people on the client side should be limited to how many people can eat 1 pizza. We want to make sure that the customer has skin in the game. Part of that is the money, part of that is those stakeholders. At the same time as you don't want to run it as self-serve, you also don't want to be doing too much on your side. You want to have them be very involved. So they have money in the game and they have time in the game. You want to keep your general approach and methodology very similar to that wider customer journey. We don't want to be overcomplicating or over-engineering this proof of concept. And we want them to really be getting a similar experience to what you'll be doing when the relationship expands. Goals and success criteria. This is going to look really familiar to most of you, if not all of you, because this is something that we do with all of our client relationships regardless, right? This is something that we do to make sure that we're tracking with our customers toward renewal. But at the very beginning of this relationship, especially because we're going to talk about how important it is to keep that scope small, keep that timing short, we may not be able to get to some of the longer term business value. So I've gone out, why not just ask the question directly? What would have to happen in this proof of concept or this pilot for you to say this was a raving success at the end? Ask the question and they'll very often just give you the answer. And that's what you want to know. Is it about the employee experience? Is it about something that's more quantitative that you can track, some sort of growth in one area? Things like, a lot of us have ties to cost savings or attrition of teams or employee engagement, various metrics that might not be able to be tracked for months after. So we really want to get this down to what can we track in this very short period of time? What kind of business value can we prove in this amount of timeline? And often at Learn to Win, we now have a short list of things that we can suggest to customers, right? That we have in our back pockets if they don't have answers to these questions off the bat. So they can sort of choose from a menu, and that allows us to, we know that we can prove those, right? That we know that those are things that we can go back to and measure. So you can see below here, I have the SMART acronym, which is very similar to the regular goals acronym, but I did change the R, which is why I bolded it. I didn't want you all to think that I messed up, because everything is very similar to that SMART acronym, except I would replace the R with realistic. What is a realistic goal that we can try and attain in a very short proof of concept timeline? And that's where our help very often will come in. So this timeline, milestones, we want to put that out there. We want to make sure that the customer understands, is this a 60-day pilot? Is this a 90-day pilot? At Learn to Win, we have really driven to a 60-day timeline where we know that we can prove value to our customer prospects in a 60-day timeline. We have our design phase, we have our experience, and then we have our evaluate. And I would challenge every single one of you to look at what is the shortest time to value that you can give. You want to keep your stakeholders on task. You want to keep them really engaged in this time period. You want to continue to have check-ins with them, whether it's once a week, twice a week, and drive to that value as quickly as you can in the shortest amount of time that you can. So in week one, we talk about this. We set our experience timeline. We set our evaluate timeline. We make sure that in that evaluate timeline, we have the sales team teed up as well. But we want to make that as short a time as possible to get to that level of value. The experience itself, right? This is where, you start to think ahead and you start to think about what are the results? How are we tracking toward those goals that we set out at the very beginning? We want to make sure that during that period of time that the customer is getting a really high touch service. They're feeling all the love from you. You're not necessarily giving them the results yet because you want that to be much more of a big reveal in a sense and be able to tell a really nice story behind it. But you're going to be tracking those results. If you're starting to not see some of the expected results that you were hoping to see, you can start to bring in some other concepts, some other ideas, and deploy those. And you'll have those in your back pocket, of course. And again, they're very similar to what you would have in your full customer journey. But you want to have regular contact throughout with your stakeholders, right? And again, you don't want to provide those results until that insights review. You want to have an inclusive, holistic picture of what happened and how can you make that look like it's progressing towards success. Sometimes it might not be perfect, and that's okay. And we're going to talk about that insights review on this next slide. So you want to kind of tell this like a story. I want to go back to Kristi using my example earlier and say, once I realized that she was actually looking for distance, not speed, we course corrected that really early in the process. And we want to come back and we want to see how is she tracking toward that and treat this like a mini QBR. How did we do against those goals? We don't want to, everything's not perfect. We recognize that. And again, to me, that this proof of concept isn't a, did we do good? Did we do bad, right? Did we win? Did we lose? It is, what were the 2 or 3 wins that we saw in this process? And maybe what are 1 or 2 misses? And as we think to expand, which is the very key language here, it's not the, are we going to get the deal or are we not? It is, how would we pivot when we go to a larger audience? If we did this as a very small proof of concept, or how would we pivot if we're going to expand in another way to, more content, more something else? We're very specific with both qualitative and quantitative results. So again, tracking back to those initial goals, making sure that we understood what they were, making sure that we have the story that helps support that question of what would it take for this to be a raving success? What did we learn? We answer that again, qualitative, quantitative. We'll often do surveys to people that experienced were part of the experience to get their direct feedback. If there were quotes made through the process from any of the stakeholders and any of those check-ins, we save those as well. And that's where we think about, where do we need to pivot to improve for the expansion? So it's really, really key there. Again, and I know I've said this a few times, to think about it in terms of, we didn't win or lose. How are we going to expand, and how would we look to expand? So for example, if maybe there wasn't engagement from one part of the pilot program, we would come to the table with ideas on how to engage that audience. If we had some wins around it took less time for your team to do this than something else, we could expand those numbers to show what does time mean in terms of money, and how much money would potentially be saved over the course of a year if we continue to do this in a wider format. So tons of opportunity here to tell that story and work toward that expansion. So I think, Kristi, I wanted to keep this, again, fairly short. I didn't do my greatest in terms of speed talking. I think I went really quickly, but would love to pause, see if there are questions, and answer as many as are out there.
You did great, Julie. And I think that what you've teed up here is going to be, I think, a great segue to have a conversation, which is always, I think, what people prefer anyway, is the dynamic conversation that comes from these. So we've got a few questions teed up here. So I'm going to actually start at the top. So first one, who should own the expansion of the relationship, sales or CS? If sales, how should they remain involved?
That's a great question. And first of all, I want to say hi to Travis. Travis is a former colleague from Glint. So hi, Travis. And I think actually it was interesting, Kristi, this same question was one that one of your CSMs asked me when we were talking about this topic for today. So I'm really glad it came up. So Travis, I truly believe that sales needs to own the expansion of the relationship. I know there are two very polarized camps about who owns renewals and expansions of the relationship. To me, it is the sales that owns it. CS tees it up, right? So sales, is at the first call, and then we invite them back toward the very end. We invite them to participate in the internal meetings around that insights review, because we then have a sense of how did things go? How are we going to tee things up for them? So we do let them go for, probably 3 meetings or so in the crux of the pilot, but they do come back in at the end, and we've teed them up. We've, provided them with the right information, and continue to support them.
I think that's awesome. And listen, I always say it depends, right? Every organization is going to operate a little differently. So if that doesn't make sense, it's something to consider, but I would agree though, in those instances, sales should be leading out. All right, our next question. Even if you have the kickoff meeting to find out goals and success criteria, if you have a self-service component that you're trying to get the customer to adopt in the POC, should you still stay away from running a self-service POC?
Really great question. I think that there's still significant involvement that CS should have, even if one of the main goals is self-serve. So I think that there still should be weekly check-ins to make sure that things are happening. I think that there should be homework in a sense to give to the client each week, check-ins that we're seeing, how did certain things feel. Some of that might be part of the goals. If the goals are for a self-service, product of some sort, then that's really key to it. But you still want to have regular touch points throughout. So you're not surprised. You're not going back to them to say, hey, we lost you there for a couple weeks. So I think continuing to have those touch points, even in a self-serve product, is really important.
That's great. All right, we got a question here from Sabrina. What strategy did you use to help determine the journey milestones that correlate to the best outcomes and conversions in pilots? It's tempting to over-index on support.
Sabrina, another former colleague. It's so fun to see you all here. So I would say that what we did is we looked at where were the most successful pilots and what did we find common in those to make them successful. So, and again, we wanted to make it really simple. We wanted to see what is that shortest time to value. So when we figured out what the shortest time to value was, which again, for us was in that 60-day mark, was really kind of this sweet spot for us. We realized that we could, in 2 to 3 weeks, build content with our customer partners. We could have the learners take a 2-week journey. Things don't fall to the end of their inbox, for example, to the bottom of their inbox, and then a couple weeks to pull that story together. It was a really sweet spot. And we were able part of that was to be able to see what were those big moments, even within that little mini journey, that we're able to see what the positive outcomes were and how are we able to then present that back for a really winning story. And 60 days is a great amount of time because you're able to really keep them engaged. I hope that answers your question, Sabrina.
All right, so I'm going to combine a couple questions here. So one was, I saw don't do it for free. Why? And there's another question here. It's, should you always charge for a POC? Is there a scenario where it would be at zero cost?
So to me, the don't do it for free and why we charge is to have that skin in the game for the client partner. I think that, there might be a space for what I would consider a very short trial potentially. We haven't done a lot with trials. I don't know how, I think different softwares have different conversion rates for free trials. But I think that having that skin in the game, they realize that they're bringing something to the table. They have an expectation of a result as well from us. So they know that everyone's putting work in as well. And I just think that's the route to go, in my opinion. I think that, what was the other question? It was similar to that.
Is there the same? So it's, is there a scenario where you might not charge for it?
I haven't been in one. I think it's really important to charge for those. Again, I know that some organizations have more of like a free trial, which is very different. Which might just be more of a sandbox for a couple of weeks to play with something, but doesn't have the key results and outcomes that would come with a true pilot. Kristi, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Oh gosh, I'm in the same camp as you. I think like you're going to get engagement when you charge for it. It's like an event, right? I can tell you, we host a ton of in-field events, and it's $0 to register, but registration is in 100%. You charge $5 for a ticket, you're usually going to get like 90% attendance, right? And it's the same thing, right? It's people, if they're making the investment, whether that's time or money, obviously it's going to demonstrate their commitment to it. So we typically also would charge for something like that. Now, client success, we don't do a lot of POCs, so that's not something we focus on here, but in a previous life, that was a big part of some of the work that I had done. So I support the pay for the POC. All right, so we've got a couple additional questions coming in here. How do you best communicate to your clients that their commitment and engagement is necessary as well for the success?
Great question. And I think that's part of the structure, Rebecca. I think for me, we actually, I use a 3-word sort of thing that I start with, and it's collaborate, communicate, and celebrate. And every company can have their own, but those are 3 words that really encapsulate how we want to handle pilots with our customers and really longer term relationships as well. So it is about those, roles and responsibilities. We need you to be engaged. We need you to collaborate with us. We need you to celebrate with us. And if anything, on a client call, even this morning, being really grateful for the feedback they were giving us on the program, on the product, whether it's good or sometimes not so good. It's just really important important to have that open and honest and transparent communication that we try and set forth with it from our CSMs on a daily basis with their client partners.
I think it's great. All right, Nate's got an interesting question here. And this is, I would love to hear your take on this, Julie. Do you put something into the POC contract that requires them to purchase an annual subscription if the success criteria for the POC is satisfied?
We don't. I don't know. We obviously do a short-term contract for the POC in and of itself. I can tell you that our conversion rate is very, very high. So I don't know how customers would feel about that. I don't know if if that would be flagged or not, but we actually don't. We do, as all CSMs do, tell really amazing stories, even if everything wasn't a perfect success. We're not lying, right? But we're making sure that we're putting the right message out there to our clients as well. But we do not put any sort of any language into the contract.
Nate, if you do try that and it works, please let me know.
Yeah, let us know.
Super interested in that. We've done stuff like that, but not with POCs, more like if we're making investments in product development, right? Yeah. So you've got a customer who's coming up for renewal, but their renewal is contingent on certain product deliverables or things like that. We've built that in, right? Like if we deliver something by a certain timeline, the commitment is to extend the contract to X date. So I've seen it there. I've not seen it in a POC, which I'm super interested to see if that does convert. All right, we've got some more great questions coming in. So Melissa had asked, how do you handle situations where the measurable goals, which gave me measurables, goals you get from stakeholders are either too vague or too long-term, especially if the client needs to compare data external to the POC with data that comes in from the POC?
That is a great question, Melissa. I would say that we try and make sure that in that first kickoff meeting, and if we need to even extend that into the second meeting, that we know that those goals, and that's why I changed the R from reasonable to realistic in the SMART goals, because we need to make sure those are things that we can actually measure. So if they want to try and prove that attrition was less, we know you can't do that in a really small pilot. We know that we have done that with some of our longer term clients, and we can say that, right? Because we have the data to support it. But we need to really make sure and drill into those measurable goals to make sure that they very much are realistic in the time frame of the proof of concept. Really key to that part of it.
I feel like that's the one thing where, right, things can get a little hairy is if you don't lock those down. So I love that your approach to that is, take as much time as needed to get really tight on what those realistic goals are. All right. I could add a question. So Julie, if you don't mind, I'm going to seed my own because Zoom won't let me drop my question into the Q&A, but I had a question around staffing. How do you staff your team to support a POC program?
So that's another, these are all amazing questions. I knew you'd throw in a tough one, Kristi. Originally, we thought we were going to have a couple of CSMs only do pilot programs, and we don't now. We actually rotate that around to the various CSMs based on really what their bandwidth looks like, what their expertise looks like. And, have they run a pilot that is potentially similar to the one that they ran before? We can, because we're so crisp on the structure and we know that they're 60 days, and that's really what is in, everything. We know what it takes to get one done. So we just build that in the portfolio mix, much like we would build in onboarding new clients.
Okay, that's great. Because I know that that's going to come up a lot for companies. Can I ask you a follow-up question on that, Julie?
Of course.
So are you getting visibility from the sales team on the number of pilots that could be coming up the same way you would forecast new deals coming in? Are you able to see the same visibility around new pilots?
We are, in fact, and now I'll give the plug for client success, because we do run all of our pilots in customers, as customer success or client success clients, just like we do with full clients. So we have them in there as a pilot so that we can track them and understand exactly what's coming. Same thing, with our integration with Salesforce, we understand exactly what's coming in. Is it and it's because of an amazing team member of mine who may be on today. His name is Michael. We've got integration into Slack, Salesforce, and client success. So we have full visibility of exactly where everything is.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's always the biggest thing, right? Is seeing what's coming so you can anticipate staffing for that. I think nobody likes to be surprised last minute that they've just received a new project. All right, let's see. We've got a couple more in here. So Adam had asked, and we may have addressed this a little bit, but let's get tight on his question. Who should own the, well, he called it a trial here. And I know there's a difference between a trial and a POC, and we can probably talk about that too. We're selling into enterprise markets, and our trials are taking up a lot of CSAM's bandwidth. It takes technical knowledge to implement and set up the trial. So I'm not sure, he talked about who should own it, right? So I think from that standpoint, I think we've talked about that a little bit, but any specifics that might address this a little bit more for Adam?
Yeah, I think, Adam, it is the CSM that should own the actual pilot relationship. I think that if it takes, that technical knowledge to implement and set up, I think that that's where the scope comes in again. And obviously not knowing your product or service that you're selling, keeping that scope really tight. You're only going to pilot, in some cases, if I look back to some software that I've worked with in the past, you're not going to pilot an entire suite of products. You really want to make sure you're keying in on one piece that can show the value that the customer is really going after, and stay crisp to that, so that, again, you're not spending too much time or intensity on your side, for that very reason.
All right, very good. So Elena, she asked in the chat, and this was actually a question that I wrote down too, so I'm glad that Elena asked it. She goes, would you consider opt-out clauses in an annual subscription of proof of concept? Would you treat them differently to a regular POC?
Can you read the first half of that again?
Sure. Would you consider opt-out clauses? So like, let's just say the customer can exit their contract after 60 days or 90 days, right? Some opt-out clause in an annual subscription. Would you treat that like a POC, or would you treat it just like a regular customer and kind of go through the motions of the typical life cycle?
I mean, if we don't do contracts like that personally, so if we did, I would say that I would absolutely treat it like a POC, because if you certainly don't want them to opt out. So I would want to make sure that we're doing almost a QBR shortly before that opt out expires. But again, not so familiar with having that opt out clause, so not necessarily an expert in that space.
So I'll lean in a little bit here. I feel like opt-outs are probably more my jam, sadly. But our contracts can sometimes have that, right? Because the customer is not ready to commit. They've got to figure out if this is what they need, if it's going to solve their problems, if they have the bandwidth and the strategy to support them long-term, right? So we've actually treated it very similarly, where we just accelerate what the onboarding experience would look like to give them a taste of what they would experience beyond the onboarding. And then obviously make sure that we're clear on what their goals are and what they need to see to not execute that opt-out. So we do treat them like pilots, probably not as formally as Julie does with the work that she's doing. So almost maybe like a modified, lighter version of it. But after hearing some of Julie's points today, I do feel like I'll be taking a little bit more of that to make things a little crisper for us to navigate this, because it's not an uncommon thing that we would see in our book, is to have those opt-outs. All right, let's see. I think we've got a couple more questions here. All right, I think, okay, so Linda had asked, if you think sales, if we think sales should own it, do they keep their relationships going with the client? So thinking about this from a buying committee perspective in a high value B2B enterprise, do we make them a staying committee?
So I think that, again, depending on the size of the organization and the structure, some part of sales is going to always be involved. And, you want to keep them apprised of any stakeholder changes, any significant business changes in the process. They pop into meetings every so often as appropriate, right? Again, based on the size and of the organization and the structure. So, the concept, I love that concept of a staying committee. Again, the CSM in the organizations that I feel like are really my sweet spot, which are, early startups to, kind of the bigger organizations, but maybe not multi-level within both sales and services, is they maintain that relationship. The CSM stays close. The CSM brings them in at all the appropriate, moments that really they need to be involved in, but are not part of like the everyday tactical parts of the relationship.
I think it makes a ton of sense. It also makes it clear on roles and responsibilities, right? Because you don't want to muddy the water when you're trying to do the work throughout the pilot also. All right, very good. Let's see. Anthony had a question for us. If a client says no to the product after the POC, how best can you leverage the use case or success criteria to ensure you're able to attract other customers?
Really nice question. So I think that we have learnings from all of them, right? So if you have a pilot that someone didn't end up getting the budget they wanted, or you still have a success story from that pilot, and you can still, anonymize the data and leverage it for a future prospect. We did have one that just, the business was not booming at the customer's business, nothing to do with Learn to Win, wasn't booming, and they weren't able to sign a contract with us. They actually referred us to other people. They got us in the door with a couple other people that could, right? And we were able to leverage their story with their name in that particular case, in that story. So even if one door closes, I do believe that something else is out there, and continue to leverage that story, again, anonymous or not.
I think it's great. We should always be trying to figure out how do we take the learnings that we've had and use them to our advantage. So I think it's wonderful. All right, we've got another question here. So what strategies would you recommend utilizing to shrink the consumption gap, product capabilities versus customers' use of the product, to keep the customer engaged more?
I'm just thinking about this one for just a second. So I think you're assuming here that the product has more capabilities and the customer isn't using the full product. Is that a fair assumption, do you think, in that question, Kristi?
I think so, because it's product capabilities versus the customer's use of the product, right? Like you have, like within ClientSuccess, Julie, we'll use that because we're both super familiar. If your team wasn't using everything, right, that's not going to tell me the story, right? We might be very specific and just using certain parts of it that are tied to the success criteria or their outcomes. Yeah. So I would say I wouldn't be analyzing total consumption or product usage and adoption as part of the pilot. And I think that's what I think is what's being asked here.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And again, if it's not necessarily about the bells and whistles of the product or the features, it's about the business value, about the, are we hitting that value mark for them?
Yeah, I agree. And this is why, going back to that, being the most important and most, I think, critical piece of the POC program is being very clear on those realistic goals that you're setting up front. Yeah. All right, very good. Let's see. Julie, I think that might bring us to the end of our questions. So I will give just a quick call for any additional. So if there's a question that has not been answered that you'd like answered, I know there was a couple in here that were tied to ClientSuccess. I will take those offline and message you, so you're not going ignored. Not appropriate for the format of the webinar. I don't want to derail and make this about ClientSuccess, but happy to follow up with you separately. But if anyone else has additional questions, now would be a great time. Let's see. Okay, so we had a question dropped in here, and it says, I'm unfamiliar with the acronym QBR. Can you explain? So just somebody looking for some clarification around the quarterly business review.
Yeah, so quarterly business review is the acronym. Some people might call them EBRs. So executive business review, you can just call it a business review. But the idea here is getting out of the weeds, getting out of the everyday tactical pieces of being a CSM and making sure your customer is getting X, Y, and Z done toward their next launch or toward their next whatever, activity, is taking a step back, always refocusing on what those goals are, seeing how they're doing against those goals. Are there new goals that they have for the next quarter? How can we potentially pivot? So having those meetings pretty frequently. And again, during a pilot, it's really important to make sure that we spend a pretty good chunk of time prepping for that. Because, obviously we want to expand that relationship. That's what it is.
Wonderful. I think that might be all, unless we'll give another call for questions if there's anything else. Or Julie, anything else that you want to expand on? I'm looking at my questions. I had a whole bunch of post-it questions teed up, but everyone asked them, so I didn't even have to dip into my well of goodies here.
No, I just want to thank everyone. I hope everyone did get something from today's talk. I love the constant conversation that was going in the chat. Hopefully, Kristi, you can share that with me so I can read some of it later. But yeah, I appreciate it and hope it was helpful.
Wonderful. Well, I know that, listen, I think there's room for us to take the concepts of what we learned here. Not every business, not every technology, right, needs a full-blown POC program. But I think there's elements of what Julie presented today that we should all be considering, because even when we work with our customers and defining their goals, scoping things properly, managing expectations, bringing the right people to the table. Those are all key components of what she does to drive success there, and things that we should all be doing to drive success with our customers, regardless on the duration of time, the scope of the contract, and the work there. So just things to think about. So I think there was a ton of valuable insight here Julie shared. I'm looking to see if I've missed any questions that have come through, and I don't think that I have. So I think that we are okay to wrap up. So I'll give you all 15 minutes back in your day, which nobody hates. Maybe it's lunchtime for you, maybe it's dinner time for you. We've got so many of our global friends. But Julie, I just want to give you a big thank you. This was super informative, lots of great insight, and I think just food for thought, right? I think as companies are evolving in the scope of the work they do with their counterparts in sales, I think there's just a huge learning here, and I think a huge opportunity for businesses to get more business, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? If someone isn't ready to sign the bigger deal, do a proof of concept, show them the value, and there you've got it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely love it. Well, thank you all so much. Again, just a quick reminder, the recordings and everything will be shared later this week. So please stay tuned, tell your friends. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with some additional webinars. So stay tuned. We'll be sending out some reminders and some updates around some of our upcoming speakers and the content there. We'll also be preparing for our July boot camp. So if you've been attending our boot camp series in the past, please stay tuned for that. We'll be getting out some promotions around that. And as always, we just want you all to have a great rest of your day, great week, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye, everyone.